The race for the latest 5th generation fighter ready to defend US airspace was a money no object battle between two teams of manufacturers. One with the legendary Lockheed Martin, who had designed some aircraft like the F-117 and the SR-71 in partnership with Boeing, and the opposing side being Northrop in combination with McDonnell Douglas, who have both made stunning aircraft such as the F-18 and the F-15. Both of these teams would be up to the task to create the newest and most technologically challenging aircraft to have ever been developed. In June 1981, the Air Force had issued a new request for information to 7 military aircraft contractors. This request would be to gather information to see the viability and possibility of a next-generation fighter named the Advanced Tactical Fighter. Very creative, I know. The new requests required information for an air superiority fighter to understand how possible it'd be to create a stealth fighter that not only had the stealth capabilities of the F-117 Nighthawk and partial stealth of the SR-71 Blackbird, which were only bombers and reconnaissance planes, but also the agility of the F-15. This would be the next generation of fighter succeeding 4th generation aircrafts like the F-15 and the F-16, because the threat of Su-27s and MiG-29s were coming more and more into reality, with the Air Force believing that they may be on par with their own current fleet of 4th generation fighters. The new fighter would incorporate the stealth technologies learned from the F-117 and improved further with new advancements such as computational fluid dynamics. During the development of the F-117, engineers and designers would be required to use drawings and sketches on paper, which could be built into a scaled model and test in a wind tunnel with radar pings pointed towards it to test the stealthiness of the aircraft. That's why the F-117 is such a weird shape of aircraft with its straight body panels, because it's early in development of stealth. Designers found that the flat, straight surfaces deflected most of the radar waves. Due to the lack of knowledge and computing power at the time, engineers could only be so creative with pen and paper, whilst newer developments like the F-22 and the B-2 have much more curvier designs due to developments in computer-aided design. By 1984, the request for information had been filled, and the Air Force had created a list of essential requirements for contractors by September 1985. These were as follows: a fully demonstratable, real-life prototype developed and created in 50 months for testing, stealth technology for low radar signatures, a lightweight, strong airframe to allow high Gs of movement, as well as being able to take off with a load of armaments up to 23,000 kilograms on a short runway of 910 meters, a combat radius of 800 miles with the ability to carry drop tanks to increase range, supercruise of Mach 1.5, which is sustaining supersonic flight without using the afterburners to save fuel, and finally, cheap and easy maintenance. The contract value of this program would be $86 billion, which in today's money would be worth just shy of $205 billion. Two contenders for this high-value contract came out on top, which were Northrop and Lockheed Martin. However, as companies working exclusively on government contracts, they didn't have the cash to stump up the cost of full development and produce prototypes for the new Advanced Tactical Fighter. Lockheed teamed up with the airline heavyweight Boeing, whilst Northrop favored another contractor, McDonnell Douglas, who were already mass-producing aircrafts like the F-15 and exporting them. Lockheed and Boeing eventually developed their prototype called the YF-22, which pretty closely resembles the modern-day F-22, whilst Northrop and McDonnell Douglas had created the YF-23. Both aircrafts had very different designs, with the YF-22 adopting a modified delta wing, and the YF-23 used more of a diamond-shaped wing. The most notable difference between the two was the fact that the YF-23 had no horizontal stabilizer or elevator, unlike the YF-22. The YF-23 instead utilized its array of other flight surfaces, such as its V-tail and ailerons, to perform the job of elevators. The YF-23 didn't have a horizontal stabilizer because when an aircraft has more panels and surfaces, it increases the radar signature, drag, and weight. Stealth is basically reducing your radar signature, as it's nearly impossible to eliminate altogether. But one way of eliminating its radar signature is by not having anything there in the first place to reflect off of. It was believed at the time it would be just as agile as the F-15 Eagle, so the main focus was shifted to increasing the speed and stealth capabilities. The aircrafts both had new aircraft engine concepts called augmented turbofans. These new engines, combined with a new 5th generation streamlined body, could reduce fuel use up to 22% compared to a 4th generation fighter. Both used the Pratt & Whitney F119, which is capable of supercruising to Mach 1.4 on both. But the second YF-23 aircraft had switched to General Electric engines on its second prototype that were capable of Mach 1.8 on supercruise. Both aircrafts had integrated new stealth intricacies, such as using an S-duct-like display on screen. The S-duct would essentially make any radar waves heading towards the engine intake rendered weak and useless when going back to its receiver by reflecting waves in the intake hundreds of times, therefore reducing the wave's energy. Another stealth technology was the use of a honeycomb mesh-like design within the airframe, which would again reflect radar signals internally that penetrated the aircraft's skin and returning them to the receiver as weak and useless. Both aircraft stored the weapons internally, which increased the size of each aircraft by over 20% over its predecessors. For maneuverability, the YF-22 had 2 horizontal stabilizers that the YF-23 lacked, which would move as a total unit instead of a partial bit. It also used something new called thrust vectoring, which would direct the engine's thrust in a specific direction at the pilot's discretion. This adds another flight surface on the aircraft directly in front of the engines. This was key and one of the most notable developments of the YF-22 that the YF-23 lacked, and that was low-speed agility. Both aircrafts were marvels, even in their development stage, in which the YF-22 took nearly 18,000 hours of wind tunnel testing before reaching its final form. In short, the YF-22 developed to be an agile fighter for dogfights that may arise in the skies, while the YF-23 was more focused on increasing its range, speed, and stealth signature. The first YF-23 was flown on the 18th of September 1990, whilst the first YF-22 would fly 11 days later on September 29th. When compared, many would argue that the YF-23 was the better aircraft because in overall terms, they both flew similarly-ish to each other when it came to supercruising and general flying. However, when a dogfight would occur at lower speeds, which were at 300 to 500 miles per hour, the YF-22's advantages of dedicated horizontal stabilizers and thrust vectoring would prove to be deadly compared to the YF-23, which lacked the low-speed maneuvering department. The YF-22 had a 60-degree angle of attack, whilst the YF-23 only had an angle of attack of 25 degrees. And to increase insult to injury, the YF-22 had a pitch rate twice that of the F-16 due to its thrust vectoring. Through Lockheed's experience of past military contracts, they knew a more visually impacting marketing demonstration would be key to acquiring the contract. Although not required, the YF-22 had launched AIM-9 Sidewinder and AMRAAM missiles from its internal weapons bays, whilst the YF-23 prototype didn't have that capability. Only one of the 4 demonstratable aircrafts had incidents, and that was a YF-22 when the pilot tried to land. It was seriously damaged but repairable, with the pilot walking free of any injuries. Other than that, both aircraft had flown perfectly well, with the YF-22 achieving a supercruise speed of Mach 1.43 with a max speed of over Mach 2. The YF-23 achieved a supercruise speed of Mach 1.58 with a max speed of Mach 1.8. On April 23, 1991, after 7 months of testing both prototype aircraft, which the YF-22 would rack up over 150 hours and the YF-23 61 hours. The YF-22 was announced the winner because of various reasons. One of the main reasons was cost, which was a big problem with the YF-23 due to its diamond-shaped wings and use of a V-tail than conventional vertical and horizontal stabilizer setups. This meant that the V-tail had to be produced extremely strong to support the ability to withstand intense Gs of various maneuvers that may have been delegated to those separate surfaces. Another reason that the Air Force at the time had prioritized maneuverability was because of the lessons learnt with the F-4 Phantom during Vietnam. The YF-22 also was believed to be the better platform for adaptation to a Navy version, however was swiftly cancelled. In the testing phase, it was seen the YF-23 is a stealthier aircraft due to less surface. It was a close battle for the contract, but the YF-22 eventually won it. Only one man had flown both the YF-22 and YF-23, and that was Paul Metz. Paul Metz had said that the YF-22 is more mature to fly compared to the YF-23, even if the YF-23 was superior in some other departments like supercruise. This was most likely due to the conventional control surface, like the horizontal stabilizer and elevator. However, he had more confidence in flying the YF-22 at high G maneuvers and trusted the aircraft more. If you've liked the video so far, remember to like and subscribe. The final form of the aircraft that went into production had several changes to the YF-22 prototype, such as moving the cockpit 7 inches forward to increase visibility and reducing the vertical stabilizer's surface area by 20%. It's rumored that the aircraft can climb up to 62,000 feet per minute with a max speed of Mach 2.25, which is 20,000 feet more than the normal airliner at regular cruising altitudes. The canopy window of the plane is lined with a very thin layer of gold, only a few atoms thick, to contain any electromagnetic emissions that may enter or leave the cockpit that will compromise the stealth of the aircraft. This is what gives the gold tint when looking at photos. To remain stealth during a dogfight, the aircraft has 3 internal weapons bays, which are 2 smaller ones on either side of the fuselage for AIM-9 sidewinders, along with 1 big bay underneath to carry mission-dependent missiles. For very close-up situations, the Air Force had learnt their lesson and installed an internal M61A2 6-barrel cannon with 480 rounds on top of the right engine intake. The cockpit of the F-22 is largely unknown, with very few good images due to classified technology, but we can see through this rumored image that it's nothing like its predecessors. You'll likely see very few or no analog instruments, but instead you'll see a full array of screens to produce not only real-time data about the aircraft like altitude, etc., but also something called sensor fusion. Sensor fusion is designed to work with the aircraft's own sensors, allied aircrafts like F-22s or F-35s, and ground assets to assemble an overall picture of the battlefield. This is to remove the need of a navigator to keep an eye on the radars, but rather delegate the tasks to a computer doing all the work by piecing the whole thing together. This is a key in today's age where intelligence is the most important thing when it comes to attacking specific enemy assets. The original plan was to buy 750 F-22s as per the original request in 1985. However, as budgets started to decrease and costs increase, the F-22 order had decreased to less than half by 1997, from only 337 were going to be made. By the end of it, only 187 aircrafts were produced, 25% of the original request. This, in part, was due to the decrease in GDP being spent on military. In the 1980s, Reagan had allocated around 6% of GDP towards military spending, while in 2008, when the final orders were concluded, GDP military spending had decreased further to 4.5%. This may sound like small change, but with the military's ever-growing over-budget development, such as the $1 trillion F-35 project, it's no wonder why they're running out of money for all of it. Even with the ever-ending costs of the F-22, the US could have made significant profit by exporting it to allies such as Japan and Israel, who expressed major interest in the aircraft. However, due to the aircraft's extreme technology, it was concluded by Congress that the aircraft will never be exported, no matter who. Only the US will be able to fly and produce the F-22. In its present-day form, the F-22 has been used in missions over Syria to protect ground and air assets over the region. By 2018, the aircraft had totaled over 4,600 hours in air whilst propelling nearly 600 aircrafts with no missiles shot, but with merely due to its presence. Although none were shot down, the Syrians had tried to lock onto an F-22 and shoot them down, but to no avail. Currently, the F-22s being flown are dubbed as unhackable, even with its advanced avionics suite. This is because the operating system that is used is something of a relic. It's quite similar to MS-DOS, with even former Navy Secretary John Lehman saying that, quote, "No one in China knows how to program the 83 vintage IBM software that runs in them. However, even the systems have to be upgraded to modern-day standards to make sure the fighter can survive today's battles and beyond. The F-22 is supposed to last until 2060. So it's essential to upgrade the F-22 because quickly the sensor fusion integrated battlefield is becoming incompatible with systems on the F-35. Some of these upgrades are the ability to use JDAM missiles, improved radar, and an automatic oxygen backup system. Some sensor fusion upgrades include additional systems to aid, such as 2 communication in the Air Force's battlefield airborne communication nodes. In 2024, the aircraft will receive new upgrades such as a whole new suite of avionics, sensors, and antennas. Also, the aircraft, although rated for only 8,000 hours of flight time on the airframe, new programs such as Structure's Retrofit program are supposed to increase the life by utilizing some methodologies from the F-35, like its better skin and composite airframe. Overall, the program is projected to cost nearly $700 billion over its lifetime, averaging at over $3.5 billion per aircraft when including aircraft development, production, and upgrades. The real advantage of the aircraft is its stealth capabilities and sensor fusion technology. These are of great asset due to the ever-evolving battlefield and enemy developments such as the PAC-FA and the J-20 by Russia and China respectively. With the PAC-FA set for a planned introduction to the Russian Air Force this year in 2020, whilst the J-20 is already in production. These 2 aircraft are of significantly less money required to build, with both costing less than $50 million to build, while the F-22 cost the Air Force over $150 million. Hey, if you liked the video, please leave a like, subscribe, and check out our other videos. Y'all have a good one.